Alaikum. We'll get started shortly once the Imaam gets logged into the other platforms.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And we welcome you to another installment of the Monday meeting. And as always, we begin by thanking you for taking time out of your Monday evening to be with us and to sit with us as we remind ourselves of our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and encourage each other to fulfill that duty. And I particularly thank you for coming out tonight because of our current situation as a community. As you all know, the Imam was infected with the coronavirus. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to preserve him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to heal him, to make it a swift healing, and to make it a healing which is not followed by any illness. We also recognize that this is a time where there is some hesitancy, that there may be people who do not come to the mosque because of this news. And so to them, I would basically say that this is not a time to abandon faith, nor is it a time to abandon the masjid. That basically, whenever there is a trial of some sort, wherever there is a difficulty of some sort, wherever there is a cause for fear, we are supposed to resort to faith, not run away from faith, and not run away from the house of faith, meaning the masjid. But that being said, our religion is a religion of taking precautions, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَخُذُوا حِذْرَكُمْ, and take your precautions. It is also a religion where we are supposed to be keen not to harm ourselves or cause harm to others. As the Prophet said in the hadith, لَا ضَرَرْ وَلَا ضِرَارٍ, there should be no self-harm nor doing harm to others. So this is not a time to abandon the masjid, but it is a time for Ahlul Masjid, the people of the masjid, the people who come to the masjid, to be more vigilant and to be more considerate regarding their choices and how those choices will affect others. Which is why we are encouraging everyone when they come to the masjid to wear a mask, to avoid shaking hands, to social distance as and when you can, and to, practice good sanitation habits, washing of hands, hand sanitizer, etc. All the things that healthcare experts have recommended to mitigate and to minimize the spread of the virus. And obviously in our religion, we are encouraged to listen to the experts, provided the experts are saying the right things. Doesn't mean we don't question the experts on some things, like vaccines. Doesn't mean we don't question the experts on that. But when they are saying the right things and when the evidence supports what they're saying, we're supposed to accept what they say, because Allah says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge in every particular field of speciality when you don't know, when you don't have that specialization. So I just wanted to say that at the outset, especially for those who may be listening online and may have some hesitancy. Not the time to abandon the mosque, not the time to abandon faith, but we do have to be more vigilant. Tonight, we will continue our discussion of how Shaitan practices his enmity against Adam, our father Adam, and his progeny. And as always, we begin by briefly recapping the last meeting. So last week, brothers and sisters, our discussion centered around actions. Ours and those of others. Specifically, we talked extensively about the interpretation of actions and how the process of interpreting actions, whether our own or those of others, impacts the relationships we have with them. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we've been talking about. We talked about actions, how this process of interpreting the actions, whether those actions be our own, how people interpret what we do, or how we interpret the actions of others. How that process, it impacts our relationships. And we're going to see that. We're going to talk about it more specific, but I hope everybody can conceptualize what I'm talking about. That basically people do things and we interpret what they do a certain type of way. And how we interpret it ultimately impacts whether, for example, we remain friends, we become closer friends, or we become enemies. That happens. And we're going to see some practical examples of that. But more specifically, because we're talking under this umbrella of shaitan and how he practices enmity, more specifically, we were talking about how Satan uses this knowledge of how the interpretation of actions can impact relationships, and because he wants to sow discord between people who should be together, who should not be divided. He wants to divide them. He also wants us to draw closer to people that we shouldn't draw closer to. So he uses that knowledge of how this process of interpretation affects relationship, uses that knowledge to his advantage, to make us draw closer to people we shouldn't, and to draw further away from people we should be close to, right? That's specifically what we're trying to get to. That's the meat of the topic. So here are a few key points from last week's meeting before we pick up the topic from where we left off. So the first thing we said up at the outset, we said life is a collection of relationships. That's what life is. Life is a collection of relationships. Our relationship with Allah, our relationship with Allah. Our relationship with Allah, which is the most important relationship, the reason why we're here. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I've not created jinn kind and mankind except to worship me. Our relationship with our fellow man, and that's a lot of sub-relationships. Our relationships with our parents, mom and dad, relationship with our siblings, relationships with our kith and kin, right? Relationships with our friends, relationship with our spouses, right? A bunch of relationships with fellow man. And our relationship with what? Even with our environment, with our surroundings. And all of those relationships are impacted by how we interpret what? The actions of others and how our actions are interpreted. The thing about that, we talked about that those relationships are impacted sometimes positively and sometimes negatively by the actions we and others do and how those actions are interpreted. So we have these relationships, and those relationships are impacted by what? By our actions, or their actions, and how those actions are interpreted. And we have seen, probably all of us have seen, at some point how some people stop being friends because of something somebody did. Two people who were very close, all of a sudden they're not close anymore, and other people are observing the fact that they've become estranged. And they say, hey, what happened? You and so-and-so were so close. What happened? And the person says, oh, well, he did such and such. Something he did made me stop being his friend. We've also seen, maybe in our own personal experiences and the experiences of others that we've observed, how people become friends who were not friends. Maybe they were enemies, and they become friends. And the person says, you guys were enemies. You were at each other's throats, and now your bosom chums. How did this happen? The person says, well, hey, I was on I-20, pouring down rain, flat tire, and he pulled up. And, you know, if I wasn't his friend, if he felt about me the way I feel about him, I would have just drove by if the roles were reversed, but he pulled over. And he got out there in the rain and the mud with me and helped me get that tire fixed and got me back in the road. Not only that, he followed me home to make sure that I got home safe. That totally changed my perception. Something he did. Shows the type of person he is, type of Muslim he is. And yeah, I mean, all I got when the rubber hits the road and it's another Muslim brother and he's in a jam, all that personal stuff gets set aside. Tells me something about his character. Come on, man. This guy's my ride or die. If that guy ever needs anything, he could have a kidney. You know what I mean? Like, you see what I'm saying? How the whole thing changes because of something he did and how you interpret it and how that made you feel about him. طيب ثم بعد ذلك, we all agree, as Muslims, we all agree that actions send messages and convey meanings. Whether we admit it or not, we all are supposed to believe this. Why? Because the hadith, the Prophet said in the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. He said actions are but by intentions. Every time somebody does something, they do it for a reason. So the hadith tells us that actions convey meanings and they send a message. In addition to that, al-hiss, we feel naturally that when a person does something, they're saying something by doing that. And we know this to be the case because every time somebody does something, we race to do what? To interpret it. We all do it. Whenever people do anything, we immediately interpret what they did. So for example, husband brings home what? Some flowers out of the blue, and he's not really a flower bringer, right? That's not really his thing. But all of a sudden he brings some flowers. So immediately the wife starts what, saying, oh, what did he do? Right? What did he do? We immediately, tilqa'i, automatically we interpret. Hey, there's got to be something. It ain't just about being nice. You see that? Y'all see that? طيب. So we immediately go to what? Interpret the actions, right? We also talked about last week how actions are very difficult to interpret. When somebody does something, it's very difficult to know what they meant by it. In most cases, they're difficult to interpret, but we try to interpret them what? Anyway. And this often leads, since they're so difficult to interpret, so difficult to what? To break down, to dissect, we often misinterpret them. We often misinterpret the actions of others, and in many cases our actions are misconstrued, right? Or misinterpreted, right? And that tendency for us to try to interpret, we err in our interpretation, it does what? It negatively impacts our relationships. Is that not so? So for example, I remember I was a fairly new Muslim, and I used to attend a masjid in the suburbs of the northern suburbs of Detroit. And they used to have these big plastic toolboxes that they would put out on Jumu'ah with little slits cut into the top of them for people to give sadaqah, right? And so it happened that a brother, he was seen not putting money in, but taking money out. And so somebody accused him of stealing. That's the first thing that came to the person's mind when they saw this action. But in reality, that person had put a large bill in the box, and he wanted to get change. So let's say he put 100, he wanted to donate 50. So he was taking out what? The change. That brother was so hurt by being accused of stealing that his friendship with the person who accused him totally what? It was totally destroyed by that. Totally destroyed by that because he felt his integrity had been questioned. And so that failure to interpret the action correctly permanently impacted that relationship. And that's one example out of 100 we could give. But from that, we talked about that there are several factors that make actions difficult to interpret. And this is something that we have to bear in mind as the people who are receiving the actions, consuming the actions, and making a judgment on those actions. We have to bear in mind that actions are hard to interpret, and these are some things I need to consider as I try to interpret them. So one of the factors that we mentioned was that actions are open to multiple interpretations. That very seldom does a person do something and the only way it can be interpreted is what? Is this one way. Taking case in point, the brother who was trying to make change. So he's taking money out of the sadaqah box. It could be that he was trying to steal. His intention by that action was to steal. But it could also be that he was trying to make change. You see that? And it could be other things. Maybe someone was in need of money and he was like, look, I don't have the cash on me. I'm going to give it to you. And whatever I take out of here to give to you to help you out, I'll put it back later when I come from Maghrib. Whatever. It could be so many other things. You guys see that? But because of that, we have to be mindful that, okay, I'm seeing this and I'm feeling that it means this, but it could mean other things that I don't necessarily comprehend. Which makes communication keys. We're going to talk about at the end, inshallah ta'ala. When I see someone do something and it makes me think a certain way about them, rather than make that assumption, I should ask. You guys see that? Communicate. In many cases we don't. We just take whatever interpretation we have reached, and that becomes what? That becomes what it is. It is like that. But ثم بعد ذلك, another factor that affects our ability to correctly interpret is interpretations are often influenced or skewed by our perception of the actor. A lot of times we interpret an action based upon what we think about the person who did it. Is that not true? And we gave an example last week of Trump, the former president. He would say certain things that could be construed as bigoted. People he's a polarizing figure. You either love him or you hate him. There's nobody who says, the jury's still out. I'm not really sure. No, you either love him or you hate him. The people who loved him, they were reticent and even many of them outright refused to say that anything he said was bigoted or that he himself was a bigot. And those who hated him were quick to say, yep, see? Exhibit A, he's a bigot. See that? See what he said? So their perception of him is what makes people, in many cases, take the side that they take or take the position they take as far as interpreting his statements and his actions. But another factor is that actions don't tell the whole story. In a lot of cases, there's context, and a person may not necessarily feel or believe. Their feelings or their beliefs can be betrayed by what? By their actions. They can be betrayed by their actions. Isn't that so? Isn't it true that, for example, in a marital relationship, a wife can say something to her husband that makes him think she doesn't love him, but she loves him what? To death. It can happen. It can happen that a person can say or do something and that betrays what they really believe or feel. And we gave the example last week of Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a and how he basically, in action, he betrayed the Muslims, although in his heart he was sincere to the Muslims. We gave that example. But last but not least, from the factors that impacts how we interpret is that our interpretations are often influenced by our own personal experiences. Our own personal experiences with others. You have people all the time, they say, I don't trust people. I have a hard time trusting people. They'll say that to you and you just met them. Right? And you're saying, okay, you don't even know me. But the person is basically saying in a roundabout way, because of my experiences with other people, I can't trust you. What are they doing there? What they're doing there is they're allowing their experience with you to be interpreted through the lens of their what? Of their experiences with others. You guys see that? So that also impacts how we interpret people's actions. You guys see that? And so we have to be aware of all of this as we interpret actions. Why? Because Satan is keen to use our tendency to misinterpret the actions of others. And our failure to consider how how our actions might be interpreted. Shaitan, he uses two things. One, our tendency to what? To misinterpret, to rush to judgment, misinterpret the actions. He uses that to his advantage. He also uses to our advantage the fact that we ourselves are seldom carefully consider how our actions might be interpreted. We do whatever we do, and we don't think ahead of time, how could people see this? How might people see this? They might see this in a negative way. We don't think like that. So he uses that to his advantage. And he uses it to his advantage to either what? To either create discord between people who should be together. So you have two believers and they're close friends. They remind each other of Allah. They call or text each other when they first wake up in the morning to remind the other one to get up for tahajjud. They remind each other, hey, the masjid, come to the masjid. I didn't see you in the masjid. They remind each other about these acts of worship. Hey, tomorrow's Monday. Make sure you get up for suhoor. They're reminding each other, right? They're helping each other. These are two people who should what? Who should stay friends. Because they're helping each other to get to paradise. Shaitan doesn't want that. So he uses that knowledge of how actions can be misinterpreted to do what? To create discord. You got between those two people. Or to create discord between a person and the community, the Muslim community. You guys see that all the time. People who just stop coming to the mosque because of something that was said or something that was done. Doesn't that happen? And is that good for them to not be a part of the mosque? Don't people get caught out there because they're not a part of the community, not a part of the mosque? As the Prophet said in the hadith, he said, alaykum bil jama'ah. He said, I adjure you to be a part of the community, to stick with the community. Don't leave the community. فَإِنَّ الذِّئْبَ يَأْكُلُ الْقَاسِيَةِ. Because the wolf preys on the lone sheep. When you're out there by yourself, you're more likely to be what? To get caught by the shaitan. But when you're with the pack, you're safer. You guys have seen National Geographic. You've seen that, right? When you have a predator, what does a predator do? He intimidates. He comes to the pack, they're all together, he intimidates. He does something. He pounces, he growls, whatever he does, and they're timid animals. So they what? They flee. Usually, they flee together. Have you ever seen the lion, the tiger, the cheetah? Have you ever seen them chase the pack? No, they wait for that one that strays off by himself, and then they do what? They go right, they focus on him, and they run him down. See what I'm saying? The Prophet's basically saying, if you stick with the Jama'ah, you're safer. Your deen is safer, right? So the shaitan, what he does is he tries to create discord between individuals and their community so that they're caught out there by themselves, and they're easy pickings for him. He also uses our tendency to misinterpret actions to lead us astray, to make us love and be attached to people who we shouldn't be attached to. You got these people, and we talk about this all the time, and I'm going to keep talking about it until I'm blue in the face because it's important. You got these celebrity imams, and they're preaching the wrong things. And the shaitan makes us what? So enamored with them that they can say shirk, they can say kufr, they can say something which is clearly bid'ah, and we'll be nodding our heads and giving them the benefit of the doubt. The shaitan is doing what? Making us interpret everything they say in the best light, so that what? We'll continue to follow them and go astray. Y'all see that? And so this is why this is so important. And we started to talk about last week one relationship that the shaitan is keen to undermine, which is the relationship between the community and the imam and the community. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that the shaitan want to drive a wedge between the community and its imam, the imam and its community? Why do you think that is?
Because he's teaching them how to worship Allah the correct way.
Hey, so if the community questions his credibility, questions his sincerity, questions his motives, they won't follow him. And they'll do what? They'll go astray. If they're questioning his motives, then he may become what? He may become full of resentment, vengefulness, acrimony, and he won't teach them like he should. He won't guide them like he should. He won't be dedicated to them like he should. And we're not going to talk about that tonight, although we intended to. We'll shelf that for another time. Because the imam isn't here, and I just think it's more appropriate to deal with some other things which are more important for us as individuals. So tonight, what are we going to touch on? Ala ujala. Solutions. Because remember, this is a solution-oriented class. We expose the tricks of shaitan, and it doesn't do any good to expose the tricks unless we have a counter trick, right? Or a counter to the trick. A counter to the chokehold. An antidote to the poison. You see that? So we're going to talk about solutions. Protective measures we can implement to avoid falling victim to this trick of shaitan. So bear in mind, brothers and sisters, that there are basically two people involved in the process of interpreting actions. You have the actor, the one who did the action, and the one who's what? Interpreting it. So we're going to advise both of them. Advise the actor the doer of the action, and advise the interpreter. But so the actor, to the actor we say, consider carefully, look before you leap. Prior to and during any action, you have to ask yourself, how is this action going to be perceived? How is it going to be interpreted? And we don't do this enough. We tend to act and expect everyone to give us the benefit of the doubt. Is that how it works? I mean, in most cases it probably should, but it doesn't. It doesn't. People don't. And so we have to actually think and be proactive about, okay, what message am I sending by doing this? How is this going to be perceived? And you're not always going to get it right, but you try to foresee how this could be misinterpreted and create problems in your relationships. And we don't do this enough. And then when we're called on it, we want to put the onus on the other person. No, we share it's a shared onus. I have to be careful how I move, and you have to be, give me the benefit of the doubt in how you interpret. So we have to think before we speak and act. We have to look before we leap. And this measure, this counter move, is supported by the Qur'an and Hadith. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in the one ayah that we quoted last week at the outset, from Surah Al-Isra, He says, وَقُلْ لِعِبَادِي يَقُولُ الَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ يَنزَغُ بَيْنَهُمْ إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ كَانَ لِلْإِنسَانِ عَدُوًّا مُبِينًا. He says, and say to my servants that they should say that which is best, for indeed the devil sows discord amongst them. Indeed, Satan is to man a manifest enemy. Allah is saying, be careful what you say. Think about what you say and how it's going to be interpreted. Because the shaitan is going to, trust me, if you say something that's open to interpretation, the shaitan is going to interpret it in the worst way. To make sure that that brother, that sister, that friend, that relative, that spouse is going to think negatively about you and about what you did. And it's going to what? It's going to murky the waters, muddy the waters, and ruin the relationship, spoil the relationship. طيب, another example from the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, the second surah, verse number 104. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا قُولْ لَا تَقُولُوا رَاعِنَا وَقُولُوا انظُرْنَا وَاسْمَعُوا وَالْكَافِرِينَ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. Oh, you who believe, do not say ra'ina, and we're going to talk about what that means, but instead say unzurna, which actually means look at us, attend to us, and pay heed. And for those who disbelieve, there's a grievous punishment. Tayyib, this word ra'ina that Allah told the believers not to say was something that the Jews were in a habit. When the Prophet would walk through the streets of Medina, the Jews would call out from their rooftops and from their homes, ra'ina, ra'ina. This word ra'ina, it could be the imperative from the verb ra'a yurai. It could be the imperative from that, which means attend to us, pay attention to us, look after us, right? It could be the imperative from that verb. It could also be the noun associated with the action of another word, ru'una. Ru'una, which means to lack intelligence, to be careless, to be reckless, to be simple-minded. So when the Jews said it, do you think they meant the former or the latter? They meant the latter. They wanted to insult Rasulullah. Ra'ina. Basically saying that he is, waliyadu billah, simple-minded, reckless. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, but they could cover that because it's a word that could be interpreted in more than one way. So what did Allah tell the believers? He said, don't say this word, even though I'm sure you mean it with the right meaning. But say undurna, why? Look at us, be attentive to us, because it only has one interpretation. Y'all see that? Allah's telling the believers, be careful what you say, how you move, because it could be misinterpreted. So if there's an action you do that could be interpreted positively and negatively, depending on the consumer, the interpreter, and an action which can only be interpreted positively, do the one that can only be interpreted positively. You have to be careful how you move. Allah's telling the believers this. And a lot of times when people call us and say, hey, you did this, man, and that made me feel this type of way, and when we're all defensive, no. Some of the onus is on you. Yeah, you're not supposed to move like that. And when you move like that, people are going to think, they're going to think a certain way about you. So you have to be careful how you move. We also have the hadith where the Prophet said, وَمَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَسْكُتْ. He said, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, let him say good or remain quiet. Again, think about what you're going to say. Be careful what you're going to say. And if it's not good, you're not 100% sure it's good, then what? Err on the side of caution and be quiet. Y'all see that? Then you also have the hadith, very famous hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ on one particular expedition, he went out on one of these expeditions where they were going to meet the enemy, and they got to a place where they wanted to rest. So they stopped riding, they set up a camp, and people naturally, when you stop, you're a bunch of people, and you stop in any place, people naturally start to do what? Gravitate toward, their people. So people start to do that. And what ends up happening is you have a bunch of Ansar in one area, a bunch of Muhajirin in another area, and there's like a well, a water hole. So people are coming to the water hole to water themselves, to water their animals, whatever they're going to do. So in the process of this, just to break the monotony, one of the Muhajirin, he slaps one of the Ansar on the backside. And he was doing this jestingly, just to break the monotony. It's been a long journey. We're all tired. And everybody's kind of like in their own world and seeming, down and fatigued and stressed. So let's go ahead and break the monotony. Let me just do something that'll make everybody laugh. That's what he was trying to do. But the Ansari, he took issue with it. He didn't appreciate that. So he called out, he said, Ya al-Ansar. He said, oh Ansaris, you see what this guy did to me? Come to my defense. So when he did that, the Muhajir said, Ya al-Muhajirin. Y'all want to get it on? We can do that. We can be about that life. So come on, Muhajirin, come on, let's they want to fight. And y'all got to help me. Y'all can't leave me by myself because we're all Muhajirin. So it became a thing where these beautiful names, these names which were given to these two groups because of the virtuous things that they had done and the service that they had contributed to Islam. The Muhajirin had left their homes and their wealth and their families for the sake of the deen. And the Ansar had welcomed them in and shared everything that they had for the sake of the deen. Now this became like Crips and Bloods. So when the Prophet ﷺ, heard what they were saying, he came out and he said, Ada'wa al-jahiliya wa ana bayna adhurikum? He said, do I hear the call of the period of ignorance? Because that's what they were about in ignorance. It was like, help your brother whether he's right or wrong. He's like, nah, that's jahiliya. We left that for Islam. And this is what I'm hearing. So after all of this, some of the munafiqeen, when they heard that, they started saying insulting things about the Prophet. And this reached the Prophet, and it also reached Umar. So Umar, he said, Da'ni ya Rasulullah adrib unuq hadal munafiq. The one who said these bad things about you, let me take care of him. Let me go ahead and take off his head. And that'll shut him up and shut up these other munafiqeen who are just basically they've infiltrated our midst. They're all going to be afraid because I made an example out of this one munafiq who said these things. So I'm going to come to the point now. The Prophet said, just to show you how the Prophet thought and is teaching us to think about our actions and how it's going to be interpreted. He said, Da'hu ya Umar. He said, leave him alone, ya Umar. La yatahaddath an-nas anna Muhammadan yaqtul ashaba. He said, the people are not going to say about me that I kill my companions. Because the people outside of the Muslim community who might be thinking, pondering Islam, when the news reaches them that this particular man who was with the Prophet on an expedition to wage jihad got killed, are they going to say, oh, the Prophet killed a munafiq? No, all they know is he's a Muslim and the Prophet killed him. I don't want to be a part of a deen where you guys see that? The Prophet thought about, hey, if I move like this, this is how it's going to be interpreted. Let me not do that. So the Prophet is teaching us we need to be careful about how we move, and the onus is partially upon us. Upon who? Upon us. And we can't always blame other people. Oh, you shouldn't be interpreted. Give me the benefit of the doubt. You shouldn't be interpreted. No. Some of the onus is on you about how you move. طيب ثم بعد ذلك Another thing for the actor, another advice for the actor is do introspection. We always have to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, look, I'm doing things and people are interpreting it in the worst way. I do this and I have the best of intentions, but people think bad things about this or bad things about me and this action or whatever. They interpret it in a bad way. We have to ask ourselves what? Why? Why is it? We have to acknowledge that the problem could be what? It could be me. I could be the problem. And I have to basically start considering what I say and what I do. And also maybe change the way I act, the way I communicate in order to convey a different message. You guys see that? We have to acknowledge that onus. We have to sit with ourselves sometimes and say, you know, man, I remember when I was growing up, there was this guy on the block. He got along with everybody. I think I pretty much got along with everybody, but we did not get along. And everything I would say to him, he would take it like I was like trying to like insult him or put him down. And it's like at some point you start to say, okay, am I saying something, communicating in a way that is giving him this message without intending it? You see what I'm saying? So we have to be like that. If we start to see that people, a person or people continuously interpret our actions in a way we didn't intend, at some point we have to pull back and say, okay, is it me? Am I the problem? But now, advice to the interpreter. Number one, acknowledge the fact. If you're somebody does something and now you're gonna interpret that. You're gonna go through this process of interpreting, what did this person mean by it? One, you have to first acknowledge that interpreting actions is very what? Very difficult. You have to admit that and acknowledge. And most of the time we get it wrong. So you sit back and you say, yeah, see, that's what he meant by that. Then most likely that conclusion is wrong. So don't become a person who's like adamant, this is what it is. Because in most cases we get it wrong. But number two, you got to give people the benefit of the doubt if they deserve it. Got to give people the benefit of the doubt if they deserve it and interpret their actions the best way. And we have the ayah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ijtanibu kathiran min al-dhann." Avoid a great deal of suspicion. Inna ba'd al-dhanni itham, because some suspicion is sin. The scholars of Islam said, what is that sinful suspicion? It's dhannu kasu bi akhika al-muslim bila mustanad. It's when you assume the worst about your brother and you don't have any reason to do so. And so what that's teaching us is that if a person deserves the benefit of the doubt, we give him the benefit of the doubt. The final advice for the interpreter is you yourself have to do some introspection. You have to check yourself. You have to say to yourself, if I'm misinterpreting someone's actions, I'm always, for example, giving this person the benefit of the doubt who doesn't deserve it. Like these people just gone off, these celebrity imams, they say shirk, and you still like, oh, he didn't mean it like that. You just, he's misunderstood. It's like, if I keep doing this, if I'm interpreting what he says too favorably, why is that? Am I biased in his favor? We have to ask ourselves that. We have to check ourselves, do introspection. Or if I'm always interpreting the actions of this particular person unfavorably. He does something and everybody says, yeah, he meant this by it, positive. And I'm all, nope, negative. No matter what, he walks in and says, Assalamu alaikum. And people are like, yeah, he's saying Assalamu alaikum. No. He ain't saying Assalamu alaikum. He's calling me names. He meant something by it. He meant to insult me by saying that. You guys see that? If I'm always doing that with this particular person, I gotta say, okay, maybe I'm biased against him. I have something against him or her. You guys see that? But the last thing I want to say, this is important for relationships. Because this is what the shaitan is targeting. This is one of his main tricks. Loves to destroy marriages. Loves to destroy relationships between brothers. Loves to destroy relationships between Muslims and their community. Trying to get you away from the community so I can prey on you. So one of the key things that we need to do, brothers and sisters, to avoid being taken advantage of by the shaitan in this regard is communicate. Communicate. Communication is key. When we communicate, and this is important too, because one of the problems, I'll talk about the marital relationship, is sometimes we have a hard time communicating. And sometimes the issues we need to communicate about are thorny. They make us uncomfortable. And so rather than be uncomfortable, we just say, what? I don't want to talk about it. That doesn't help. That doesn't solve the issue. So we need to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable to save our relationships. And so you have to communicate with that person who they did something and you're interpreting in a way that upsets you, makes you look at them or perceive them in a negative light. You need to communicate with them. You need to go to them and say, hey man, you did this and it makes me feel like this about you. Is that what you intended? We need to have those conversations. And sometimes when you hear that, it may make you upset. Oh, you question my integrity. No, that's not helpful. You have to be the person who, you know what? I know what's going on here. And I'm mature enough to absorb what you said, even though I'm insulted by it. I'm hurt by it. I'm mature enough to absorb it and to respond to it in a way to make you see that what you thought wasn't what it was. So we have to communicate. Then when we communicate, the person says, hey, wallahi, I didn't mean that. Wallahi, it's not what you think. Wallahi, it's this, that, and the other. We have to take them at what? Take them at their word. We don't let that thought linger. Oh, this you're lying. Lying. Faking. Pretending. Trying to be sneaky. Because who's telling us that? Who's suggesting that? Who's feeding that? The shaitan. Y'all see that? And notice the Prophet ﷺ with Hatib. We gave the example last week, the example of Hatib. Hatib, when you look at his action, he betrayed. He committed treason. But the Prophet said, Ma hadi Hatib. Explain this. So Hatib explained. He said, Wallahi, I didn't do this kufran wa irtidadan an Islam. I didn't do this to commit apostasy or out of disbelief. I love Islam. I love the Muslims. I just did this because of some material benefit I hope to gain. That's all it was, Rasulullah. The Prophet didn't say you a liar. I don't believe you. The Prophet said what? I'll take it at your word. Y'all see that? If the Prophet did this, who are we? Just take a man at his word. I said I'm going to leave it at that. Y'all see that? Especially with the people in your circle, your close people, spouse, friends, brothers who you close with. You got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Your relationship's not going to work if it's built upon distrust. Especially distrust which is unjustified. Y'all see that? So basically, to bring it to a close, we try to interpret their actions in accordance with their stated intentions. Y'all see that? This is very, very important. So these are all of the weapons we can use to counter the trick of the shaitan. And the key one, all of them are important. Please don't forget any of them. Don't belittle any one of them, devalue any one of them. But the main one is to communicate. I saw this. Let me go to that brother or sister or spouse or friend or sibling and say, you did this. This is the way it made me feel. This is how I interpret it. What is it? And then if somebody does that to you, they come to you and they do that, you can't get mad. You gotta say, oh man, no, it's not like that. I promise you. You see what I'm saying? And in fact, it's actually what? This. Okay? And so with that, we have like about 5 minutes maybe before the adhan. So we'll open the floor if there's any questions, comments, critiques, or any just feedback, input that people want to have. And if there are sisters who don't feel uncomfortable saying it out loud, if they want to write something on a piece of paper and pass it up, we'll take that as well.
Is there a hadith about making 70-some excuses for your Muslim brother?
Not a hadith, but there are statements from the early Muslims, many statements from the early Muslims, or attributed to the early Muslims, where they said, for example, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ مِنْ أَخِيكَ مَا تُنْكِرُهُ. If you see from your brother that which you disapprove of, or it makes you uncomfortable. It disturbs you. فَالْتَمِسْ لَهُ عُذْرًا وَاحِدًا إِلَى 70 عُذْر. So seek or look for or try to make an excuse for him up to 70 excuses. فَإِن لَمْ تَجِدْ لَهُ عُذْرًا. But if you don't find, no, that's not plausible, no, that's not conceivable, no, that don't make sense, you don't find an excuse, say لَعَلَّ لَهُ عُذْرٌ لَا أَعْرِفُهُ. Then say, perhaps he has an excuse, but what? It didn't occur to me. So yeah, we should do that. Jazakallah khair. And the early Muslims used to say that, but it's not a hadith. But yeah, it's something that we should practice. Jazakallah khair.
I wasn't sure. Is it?
Yeah, it's a popular statement, and it's so popular. We people a lot of times think it must be a hadith. In fact, it's not, but it is something we should practice. Especially for the people who deserve it. Not everybody deserves that, but there are a lot of people who do, and a lot of times we don't do that. We don't give an excuse. You call somebody, they don't answer your call. Man, she ghosted me. No, I was in a hospital. You know what I mean? No, my phone died. You know, no, it's usually a good excuse. But we're quick to think that the person didn't have an excuse and they were being malicious. طيب, any other questions, comments, critiques? تفضل شيخ.
Isn't there a hadith where Isa alayhi salam witnessed, or he thought he witnessed someone stealing something and he questioned him about it? And
he took him at his word.
He took him at his word, and his comment was, "My eyes may deceive me, and Allah knows best."
Ahsant. This hadith in Bukhari. He saw somebody committing theft. He saw it with his own eyes. He basically said, you stole. The man said, Wallahi, I didn't steal. And he said, Amantu billah. He said, I believe in Allah. Like when he used the word Wallah, it's like, I have to respect that. He said, Amantu billah wa kadhabtu aynay. He said, I believe in Allah and I belie my eyes. I don't believe my eyes. Subhanallah. طيب, any other? تفضل Abu Khadija.
Anti-weaponing for the shaitan. We're learning, to utilize against the shaitan. Can we utilize, is this the same anti-weaponing for the human?
Shaitan?
In the form of human?
Hey, yeah.
We can use the same weaponing too?
Ahsan, yeah, because like you said, the shaitan doesn't always come as a jinn. Sometimes he comes as an insi, and comes as a human being, in a human form. And you can see he's playing the same tricks. Basically, shaitan is pulling the strings, but it's a person I'm dealing with. Yeah. Anti-weapon. Same thing, yeah. Same thing. But any other questions, comments, critiques? تفضل يا شيخ محمد.
I know you was using an example about the guy that was taking money out for change. You could know. But is that, if you have said before he did that, I'm saying, in other words, saying maybe it's me doing something that, I haven't been doing. He'll say, brother, come on, get change out of here. That was a little bit of the problem about others being suspected of stealing.
Certainly, some of the onus is on him. It does look, it looks questionable.
Right.
But we don't know. He may have actually said that. He may have gotten permission from someone to do that or whatever. And the person who observed it didn't know about the permission he got. Just immediately saw the action and made that assumption. So we don't know those details. But like we said, it's a shared onus. You do something, you bear part of the burden for how that action is going to be interpreted, and the other person who's interpreting it also bears some burden. It's not one or the other. That's totally responsible. Any other questions, comments, critiques? Going once, going twice. تفضل شيخ أبو بكر.
I was thinking about, the brothers took money out of the Zakaba.
Y'all like that one.
And but it would be really hard to approach him because the moment you mention the word steal, it's over. And I thought, how would I handle that?
Hey.
And the brothers that I've known for 30, 40, 50 years.
Hey, and I couldn't.
So
Hey.
I think I would just go to him and tell him how much I love him
Hey.
and how close we are. And if you need help with anything, I'm here for you.
SubhanAllah.
Just leave it at that.
Okay.
And if he did take the money and needed help, I believe he'd come to me and say, well, look, so and so, the bills are mounting and I just don't have it.
Hey.
Or he would go on because he would know that he wouldn't steal.
Hey.
like I said, I should be good at that.
Subhanallah. Wallahi, that's a pretty good, that's that wisdom, brother. That's that wisdom, brother. I'm thinking when you said the whole thing about 30, 40, 50 years, I'm saying to myself, man, I don't think, even if I knew a person that long, I could tell him that, hey, it looks like you still, I don't know if I could bring myself to tell him that, and I don't know if I could, even with 30 or 40, 50 years invested in a friendship, I still don't know if they would receive it in a way that friendship would leave that situation unscathed. You follow what I'm saying? So yeah, like you said, it's very difficult to even, how would you tell somebody, how would you, because that person's going to say, okay, we got 30, 40, 50 years together, and you think like this of me? Exactly. Allah musta'an wa alayhi tuklan. Like anything else, going once, going twice.
Would it be stealing if it was, is that actually stealing if that person is in need? I'm just curious. Didn't somebody...
It might not be stealing technically.
Okay.
But in the eyes of the people, it's gonna be considered stealing. Yeah. Exactly. How it's interpreted.
Brother Muhammad was respect when he was telling people just leave the money on the rug. He said, "You don't worry about if somebody picks it up, because if somebody picks it up, they may need it."
Yeah. Allah musta'an wa alayhi tuklan. Tayyib, anything else? Going once. Tafadali. We'll make this the last one.
The same scenario, and that person comes and says, okay, such and such, I've seen him taking up the side of the box. And you make some excuses for that person.
Hey.
Then the same person that came to you go to the next person and the next person and make the same accusation. Don't you consider that person to be a jinn or what?
So let me just make sure I understand you. So, person A saw person B take some things out of the sadaqah box. Person A proceeds to go to person C and say, hey, I saw so-and-so stealing. Person C says, make an excuse. Could be this, could be that. Person A then goes to person D, says, hey, I saw him stealing. The person says the same thing, hey, maybe it was this, maybe it was this. They start making excuses. And the person just keeps going, ignoring all these excuses, and continues to what? Make these accusations. There's a lot of context that is missing from your question, but if we say that the person was deserving of the benefit of the doubt, and you had an excuse that you could latch on to give them the benefit of the doubt, and you didn't do that, we would say that's inappropriate. We'd say that's at least inappropriate, because we've been told by Allah in the Qur'an to avoid suspicion. Some suspicion is a sin. And we've also been told by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in which He said, "In ja'akum fasiqun binaba'in fatabayyin." If a person lacking in credibility comes to you with some news, then verify it. The scholars of Islam say the opposite meaning is also intended. If somebody who's credible comes to you with some news, then you what? You accept it. And so if you know nothing about this brother but good, everybody you encounter is saying, "Oh, that guy, oh no, he wouldn't. He was probably trying to make change, whatever." And you just know, he was stealing, I'm telling you, and you don't know anything about that brother but good, and people who know him better than you are saying these good things, then yeah, you got to check yourself. There must be a sickness there, because now you're basically insisting on what? On attributing something to him, which you have every reason to believe you've misinterpreted it. And we're trying to avoid that misinterpretation because of how it destroys relationships, how the shaitan uses it. We have to be one step ahead of shaitan, smarter than shaitan. And if you really, you keep on asking these people to keep giving the same excuse, you're still not convinced, what did we say you're supposed to do? What was the number one anti-vax for this weapon of the shaitan? What was the number one thing we said?
Don't talk.
How could y'all forget this? Remember I told y'all don't forget this. No, don't talk is one, but what was the main thing you do if...
Talk to him.
I said communicate. Go to the brother. Go to the brother. Oh, I don't have the courage. I'm not built like that. Then shut up then. It's one or the other. Either you're going to go to him and say, look, man, this has really been eating at me. And I saw you take out the sadaqah box. And it's like Abu Bakr said, it's like, look, that's tread lightly. Tread lightly, it's not going to be received well. But if it's really eating at you that bad and you just gnawing at you, your only option is to go what? Communicate. Y'all remember, don't leave this class. This is the main thing, especially in your close relationship with spouse, siblings, and the brothers and sisters that you're very close to. Shaitan's trying to destroy those relationships. You got to communicate. Something makes you doubt. Something makes you question. You got to do what? Communicate. Communicate's not easy. Sometimes not a strong suit. But what's at stake? Their relationship. So it's a thorny issue. I don't feel comfortable, but I'm gonna make myself comfortable being uncomfortable because what I value this relationship. So what's the main thing we're gonna do in these situations? Please don't leave this class not. I'm telling you, man, the shaitan's gonna get us if we don't do that. Communicate. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.